Ok, bonjour tout le monde. Donc, on commence notre 8e séance.
Okay, so welcome everyone. It's going to be our 8th session today, and we're talking about visualizing data and discovery. And we are going now, the next session is going to be, well, the next two meetings are going to be December 8th. That's going to be our last one. Our last meeting is session 9 that talks about cybersecurity with the ethic of data and data ethics. And we have the pleasure to have Olivia Gélinas, who is in charge of the courses here in Polytechnique. And she works a lot with Professor Urtut. And so I'm going to speak to them. And we're going to talk about the design of data visualization. So thank you so much for the presentation. So this is, as mentioned, we're going to talk about the visualization of data. And we're going to talk more in terms of the, not too much the implementation technique, but more the standards and the different ways to visualize data. And we're going to center the discussion within the 10 commandments of data visualization. So 10 regulations, standards in general that you do when you visualize data. When you design data visualization. So to begin with, just a small background. So my background is in data visualization, and I worked in implementation and design visualization data, and I did my master's on this as well. And I'm also responsible for some courses right now for at Polytechnique, actually. And I also have a background in software engineering as well as in web development, especially on the front end. So that's all linked to data visualization, and that can live on the web by doing this web development. So it's quite interdisciplinary, but we can see that there are different sectors that can be integrated. Olivia, maybe also, is it possible, because is it going to be easier? Are you able to share in full screen mode? If not, it's not the end of the world, but let me see here. It's just that I'm on one screen, but I have it kind of like this as well. Does that work? Yeah, that way we have, it's a little bit bigger. Yep. It's just sometimes I like to point in, but it's possible that I can come back here if I needed to. Okay, as big as possible is what we want. Okay, this is the biggest. I hope that does work actually. And I'll just come back just a second here. Okay, so just to begin with the discussions, what is the visualization? So at the basis, does someone have an idea of how we could define it? What is visualization for you? If someone had something to share, you can write it in the chat, and I'd like to hear what visualization is when we're talking about visualization of data. The way that I would define it is a tool that helps in the comprehension. Yes, exactly. So that helps in comprehension. It's going to help us analyze, understand all the different data. And Catherine says it's a graphic representation of data. That's also great. And we're going to see in the next slides that it's kind of both merged together. So it's a graphic representation, but it also has not just a graphic representation, but it also has a message that, and it has a common objective that we're going to try to reach together. So just to begin, before we go into a definition that is a little bit more official, I'd like to give you as the context that the visualization course is one that is given in Polytechnique, which is 3 critiques, and we also give an accelerated 1-week training on this. So I'm just telling you this to promote this content. So if ever you want to see more of this content, it is available in both these places. But also just to frame the definition of visualization of data, So in this context, we want to summarize a university course of 45 hours in theory and 21 practical hours and a train of 10 theoretical hours plus 10 practical hours. So this course is something that is summarized that way, and that's what it's done here at Polytechnique. And you can ask questions about all of this. But so, for example, under which factor we said that we were going to use, and then it was more the theoretical or the practical part of the course. So these are questions that I'm asking myself as to how I give that class, and there's several different ways in which I can answer these questions. For example, just by analyzing these numbers or doing a calculation, etc. So therefore, yes, I can answer that way, but it would take me a little bit more time to reflect. So what I could do is to answer is to be able to visualize this information. So here you have the different modules of this course in the Polytechnic course, and as well as the accelerated one, and we can do see more visually the different answers to these questions. So it's really a visual way to be able to communicate information and the visualization of data. And the course is it free for the members? Well, it's a good question, but I do not know. I'm not the one who gives the workshop. Usually, it's the professor who does this. So it would probably be best to refer to them to get the answer. And in terms of this graph, we can come back to a definition of visualization of data. So it's a visualization of data in our definition for the course. A personal definition, there's several that exist, obviously, but the visualization data is a representation that is visual of the different conventions and objectives, which has an objective. So it's a data visualization and what it includes, but we can separate this into different elements. So we're going to do that. So to begin with, it's obvious that the visualization of data is going to consist of information. So in the case of a data visualization, the information is data. So for example, we can have a calculation sheet that could look at this, that would go, it's our information, yes. And we can define our information according to different modes as we want. And for example, here in the data, we would have several different systems that correspond to links, and if not, different dimensions and different variables, which are columns here. So this is the information that we could represent. And then after that, the visualization of data has some certain objectives. So these objectives can be several, and we also often ask the question of why in terms of data that we can create or that we want to analyze. So why is this visualization? Does it exist? What is it? Was it used for? So as we can see, there are several examples here, but the ones that we want to particularly be interested in order to understand this objective would be this one. So for example, we can go and show some tendencies, some trends. So we see that the line is going up. For example, this graph shows a tendency that is an increase. And we can show other data that is apparent. So it can give us in yellow here some of this visualization. And then there's several other different reasons why we would use that data, and we can where we can basically highlight. And following this, maybe when we think at first of a visualization, it's something that is visual, obviously, necessarily, and it's a visual representation. And here, this is just to illustrate, we have like a catalog of visualization that exists that maybe it's more familiar to us. For example, a bar chart, that's something that everyone, generally speaking, knows quite well and has already seen in the past. So we have like a catalog or bookshop of visualizations that are familiar in the language of the current information for people. So it's obvious that there are other visualizations that exist, and those things didn't exist before. It's according to our documentation. But however, we can see that as a catalog for visualization of data that is common on this website. So if we're interested, it's all done by function. which is quite interesting. And in terms of the visualization, it's all useful depending on the context. So I'd like to invite you to consult all this if you're interested in going to see the different types of visualization that can be done. And obviously, the objectives are going to change the different form that we're going to have in terms of design, the visualization. So here I'd like to show you a visualization of the same data, essentially the same thing, but that isn't really the same thing. So it's two visualizations of the subway system in Montreal. And so I'm asking the question to you, what would be my objectives of these two different visualizations? So we can see that there are some similarities. So we see the subway in both cases, but what's going to distinguish it is the objectives. What are the objectives on the left or the right, if you want to answer that question?
Je vais me lancer.
I can answer. So on the left, it's more the subway itself. So just the stations and how to orient yourself. And on the right, it's more to see what's around the station. So the whole context in which we're going to find ourselves in. So depending on the context, we can see this data, and we're going to use a different visualization to meet different objectives. So we're within, without necessarily orienting ourselves in the city of Montreal. And the map on the left is very useful. But as soon as you leave the subway, you need that reference. And the streets around Montreal, where we're looking like for a particular stop in terms of where we are. So the visualization on the right is going to become a lot more interesting for people. So depending on what we can do with, in this case, with the map, we're going to make some different choices in terms of what we want to include, how we can situate certain things, etc. Also, there's a whole creative end in terms of data visualization, as mentioned, in terms of the different types of visualization data that exist here. So there's some that exist, and we can create also as we want, and to basically meet our objectives. So obviously, creating a visualization is not something that is done instantaneously. Generally speaking, we have to follow a design process. And so within that, we're going to see who are the target audience, the objectives, the tasks, and then the targeted things. And then also with data, it's often going to be limiting. It's not something that is easy in the data, but anything that is technical, etc. So, for example, if we want to see what's going on the web, it's going to be the same for something that is visible, often on a cell phone or a screen, or if we want to print a visualization under such a paper format. But then again, the constraints will change. So it'll influence our choices of design that we're going to have at the end. And then this consists the first comment of the designer. So this is the thou shall identify the target public and the target and the targets, and it could look a little bit like this, the process for the design. So it's kind of a spiral, but the spiral that is always around the data and a whole issue. So where we're going to make some proposals and improvements of the design, implementation, a better understanding, and then we're going to be able to go around these four different points in order to be able to come to a simple conclusion. And we see a few examples of some projects that were managed by Professor Fertu. Here they are. And here are other examples. So it could be pretty fluid, like boxes at first, but eventually it does start becoming a little bit more concrete and becoming a little bit more precise. But you can see that it's very a process that is very interactive, and we don't have an absolute response from the get-go as to what the visualization is going to look like. Here is another example here that's a little bit more conceptual. And every iteration, for example, at each phase of the design, we're going to want to ask a few questions to ourselves. So what's important is what's the objective of this visualization? What's visible in this design? So actually it's so what attracts the eye? What can we understand? What's the information that we can extract from this visualization? So what's a alternative visualization? So when we're designing, we could especially push in the direction of a solution, but sometimes it's an idea of enlarging our circle of vision. So it gives us more options so we can make sure that the everything would be something that would be in a completely different direction and that best answers our questions so that we could understand a little bit later in the process. So we do design as much as possible, sometimes by starting with here. And what is this visualization for? So obviously, it's kind of what we've done from the get-go. It's to communicate information within a visual presentation, and it's to share visually in order to convince people. And if not, on another end, it could also be to analyze information. So instead of wanting to communicate and giving a message, so we want to rather give a hand to the person that is visualizing and let them analyze things for themselves without necessarily promoting a particular message. So to support different reasonings and hypotheses, it's a different phenomenon and errors that we can talk together about. And here are some examples of this. And what we did is we went up to 1955. So this is a heat card, and where each year through the date of December, we can see the amount of what does happen. So the visualization of data can also work to answer everyday questions that we have. So what has happened, it does answer quite quickly the whole question of design. And we can quite easily see how many blackout days there are. And here is another portrait of what is happening in the different jurisdictions in Quebec. So here are the 10 different indicators. And in X, we have the positioning of each jurisdiction and according to each of a central value. And we can see in general where Quebec is located in comparison to other issues, each point being a different jurisdiction, sorry. And we can see very easily where Quebec is located in general. And we can see here that we're very central. If not, it can be very spread out. And it gives a good idea of the opinion. And obviously, it's very well used in electoral context. So we can see here because the presentation from Professor Uti goes with it, and he always works with Le Devoir to develop articles with data visualization. So here it's a map of the electoral results. These are maps of electoral results in Quebec. And this is another electoral context. We're here. It's a tool for a political debate. So the CAC has attacked the PLQ 30 times, etc. And how do we do this in practice to be able to create this type of visualization? So how do we do it? So it's a process that we have already mentioned, and there are different principles that need to be applied, and we do that with several tools. So here we're going to concentrate especially on the principles and a little bit less on the tools. The process we've talked about a bit already, and we're going to be interested in all of the principles, basically. So in particular, the information has to go into a database, a data viz. So how can we encode the information in data viz? So how does a data viz, what does it consist of? So at the basis, the unit that is the easiest that we're going to talk about in terms of data visualization or a visual representation is going to be a brand. So primitive geometry. So what does that mean? It could be three things. So it could be a point, a line, or an area. So this is really on the page when we're going to even head over to a design for ourselves, and this is what it consists of. And then here, this isn't enough to be able to go and get some information. So a point on its own on a page with a whole bunch is not going to encode a visualization. It's just information. It's just a point. So how are we going to go and get some information in these brands? So we're going to use what we call encoding channels. So that's what we do visually, and that's the way to be able to link the data with a brand. So if we just put a dot on a page, it's not going to give too much information. But if you add axis X and Y, and we position the point, or we use the channel and the positioning, well, at that point, it could encode two different informations, one in X and one in Y. And if not, it's the color. So if we have 3 points and we give them 3 different colors, it does visually involve that we have 3 different categories that are to be presented in the data. So these are all tools that we can use to be able to enrich or characterize the different brands in order to go and encode the information. And there's several ones that you can see here. And we can still do more with these channels, and there's probably others as well that are not necessarily included in this list, on this list, but there are some that are more efficient than others. So in terms of our perception, our eyes can more easily decode certain things than others. So we maybe go sometimes to the ones at the top rather than the bottom of the page, but they could have a little bit more usefulness. And what I could really highlight here is that we see that there are two different categories for channels. So we have channels that are ordered and that are categorical. And what I want to say by organized is these channels that we can naturally visually give them an order. So for example, the color, I think that properly illustrates things. So if you want to compare the saturation of a color with the hue, the tint, we can easily see that this is categorical. So I can't give yellow, red, green, blue. Those colors don't necessarily have an order. And if I go towards saturation, well, here, really red towards the one that's a little bit paler. Naturally, I'm going to categorize the clear category as being smaller or weaker than the really fire engine red there. So, and that applies to really all types of channels that exist, whether they're ordered or categorical. So we can see some examples here and their classifications. And what's important to gather from all this, the different categorical and organized channels, is that obviously, as you know, in the data, when we look at the data as such, it is either categorical or it is ordered. So it's continuous. So what's important here is to always use a channel that is ordered for data that is in a certain order, and one that is categorical for those who have those data that has categories. So that's the third point, is how you use that, and you use the appropriate channel. And some more examples of channels. So the other one for positioning, and here in the back they use the length and the size to get some information. And we also have the pre-attentive one. So these are channels that are so intuitive that we don't even need to analyze this to be able to bring out some information. It's just intuitive. So it's processed by the brain even before it comes to our attention. So this is like, I ask you to find Charlie, or where's Waldo? So in order to show the different colors, I can show you this drawing, and it's just, without even looking really, you can find Waldo immediately. So the color is an example of a pre-attentive channel. We can also use illumination saturation. So here's an example that's used at a scale that is organized to be able to show this. So one is less popular, from least popular to most popular, to talk about the emissions of plants throughout the United States. So we use a paler color to be able, so it's less popular in one area than another. So we use the saturation for those types of examples. And then we can also use the announcement, like in this map that shows the different backgrounds from the different parties in New York. And here, it's an example of what not to do. So once again, in terms of the use of channels that are organized or ordered or categories, this is a map of New Orleans that shows the elevation in terms of the sea level. And we started at -4 in blue, and then here it goes up to +30 in dark red, and it shows the elevation of the land in New Orleans. So can someone tell me here why this is not good? Or I can answer because I would like to go a little bit quicker actually. So here it's not good because we're using a scale that is more categorical to show something that is in a certain order. So here the numbers are organized, so we go from -4 to +30, but we use 4 different colors, and there's no 4 cards, so there's no real reality card, but we actually have 2, negative and positive. So that could be 2 different colors, and that go up and down, but especially that it can't be 4 colors. So here, the chains of colors would be adjusted so that we could better understand the level of elevation in a more intuitive way. So once again, there's no, here's the scale. Can we ask you questions? Because there's a question in the room. Or do we wait till the end? No, we can do it now if you want. Okay, go ahead. Hello, I do have a question for you. We're talking about the prevalence of color, and it's important, but obviously for those who see the color, what would you do? What's the alternative or the solution for those who are colorblind? Well, yeah, there are tools online that allow you to test our color choices in terms of different types of color blindness that exists. I don't have them right now, but I could find them for you. But what I would recommend is in terms of the color choice, firstly, it's to limit it to not too many colors. So generally speaking, we're going to have 6 colors maximum, and then after that to test it with a tool that is available online to make sure that the colors are going to be distinguishable by most of the population. Thank you so much. Okay, perfect. So following this, so here's an example of something not to do, and then in terms of the map, something else that must not be done. So another counter examples. So the article on the web that is quite interesting. If you have the opportunity, it explains it in more detail. So here's the when maps shouldn't be maps. So that's sometimes we have geographical data, and then we get some geographical data, and we're going to draw a map because I feel like this is the natural thing to do. But sometimes, just because the data are geographical, it's not necessarily the best or most interesting choice, or the one that the most efficient one of drawing a letter. So we want to limit the letters to just when it's really the mode to communicate data that is the most efficient to be able to answer questions. So generally speaking, we want to avoid maps when the data isn't geographical. So for example, if I want to know which country in the world has the most X's, well, I don't necessarily need to know where the countries are located. I don't necessarily have to put them on a map. So I can go and see other visualizations that were maybe more efficient to communicate that type of message, so you can compare countries. So without knowing visually where they're located on a map. And this is a question that we're going to have to ask to ourselves. So is my pattern going to be geographical or not? And it's an important question to ask ourselves. And so you got to make a choice before you decide to do a map. And another thing that's quite important is that it's a perception of information, and by doing the use of data. So we want to be as honest as possible in terms of the visualization that we're going to do, as well as the message that it's going to take. So I'm going to give a few examples of this. So here, there are 2 examples in this issue that do not answer or do not meet that point. So it doesn't bias the info. It's not a bias for the information. So what's the issue with these two graphs? I'm going to give you a few seconds to be able to think about it. Okay, so on the left, if you had to calculate the percentages in the points of this letter, we think that it would be 100%, but it does not give you, it gives you 95%. So what happened to the other 5% on the map? So that gives a false impression. And similarly here, you have the impression that Milan is in orange, and so the bar is super high, but the height is actually here, or isn't even here, because it's a summary, but if you look at the numbers, it's not proportionate to its value. So it's a little bit dishonest, this whole representation. Here's another example. So can you see the issue here? If I do this, it's the same data. So here, the axis starts at 34, and here's 0. And we can see here that the message is quite different here. Here it seems to be a drastic change, but finally, there is an increment, but it's not as huge as what we would have thought. And kind of related to the fact that we weren't able to realize about that, speaking about honesty more in terms of visually, to be able to properly represent our information, we have that notion of maximizing the ratio data inc. So there's that ratio, and it's the line should be a little bit lower, and it's the one that's dedicated to data, and that's divided by the total surface. So we really want to be as efficient as possible, even in our what we're going to draw, and it's a visualization data, so it's not the chart chunk. You have certain examples of this that are going to make everything all concrete. So here's an example of chart junk. So here you have a tendency or trend, but really in terms of data ratio, there's this catcher. So it's not a really good ratio because most of the ink is for a drawing, not the actual data. Yes, we have tendency of wanting to avoid food when we're talking about food, but generally speaking, a practice that we want to avoid is that if we want to be efficient in our communication of data, once again, it's going to be like a lot of visual distractions. It's going to distract from our visualization data and the information that we're going to want to transmit. And another example here, monstrous costs. So there's a monster illustrating the message, and obviously it does have some positive marketing or whatnot, but it could, but it's not efficient. If you want to be efficient, you really have to reduce the aspects that are not essential and that aren't directly communicating the data. So just look at what we need in order to give the information, and so this could be transformed into this, where we see a lot more clearly what is represented, and also more precisely, because here with the transformation here, we can't compare the different ratios. So another example that is not as bad but illustrates the same concept is that here we have a data throughout the months, and it could be improved like this. So they're very minimally, but it shows the same information, and it makes it so that we're not distracted and we immediately see the essential of what we want to show within the graphic. So obviously, it could probably be deduced from what I was saying. We're not going to use a junk chart or 3D. 3D, we don't have a really good example in this presentation, unfortunately, except here. It kind of gives you a bit of an idea. They're trying to do it 3D, but it creates kind of a distortion, right, on the data. And as much as we want to remove as much as possible, which is drawn on the page that is not useful and in direct relation to the data, sometimes it's good to add more information, add more context for decontextualizing the data. So this decontextualization of the information without fearing of showing data in detail. So as much as we don't want to put too much in a visual representation, we can't neither not put enough. So there's another small question. Oh, yes. Can we? Okay, sorry. I apologize. Yes, I had a question in terms of the commandments and the no 3D. If we have information that is X, Y, Z, then at that point, can we show just Y, or how do you do it at that point? Well, it would really depend on the context as to what is represented by X, Y, Z. If it's something that is in a 3D, that exists in the 3D only, like for example, the position of a bird in the sky, well, yeah, it's 3D. It would be fine to put it in 3D. You almost don't have a choice to represent the information. But if not, what I would say is that we should analyze what the X, Y, and Z are, what it represents, what is it, and do I need to show all three dimensions? Can I let one go, or is there one that can be engendered by another visual representation? So can Y or Z, can Z become a color maybe instead of being in the background in the graph? Can the band be a little bit darker or clearer? So try to use the other channels to be able to show the information. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yes, that's great. Thank you. Perfect. Okay, so in order to come back, oh, sorry, another question. I'm going to interrupt right away. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, just to come back to the answer that you just gave us. If I'm in 3D, X, Y, Z, which would be good, would be to look at the color. For example, X, Y, and X, Z, and to bring back in 2D in these graphics. Yes, but it could also be a possibility. But once again, it does add visual effort. If we really want to have a 3D position, it's going to add a cognitive charge to be able to visually look at both graphs in the short-term memory and to remember the first one, and then after having to go see the second one, and then mentally make all information go together. So it really gives you a big cognitive charge to think of it that way. So we're wondering, is it worth to add that cognitive charge to the user? If yes, well, it could be done. If not, then you can maybe analyze other visual ways that are possible for illustrating the data. Thank you. Yes. Yep. So in terms of the context of data, so when do we want to add context, add data in a graph? So this is an example that illustrates a point. So this is the temperature, average temperature through time in several years. So we can see, we want to show the anomalies in the temperature. And we see that in general, there is a tendency of an increase, but it doesn't seem that bad. It's an ascending, slightly ascending, but obviously it's not. It's a false analysis. So here, if I add the temperatures from several years in the past, since 1961, and now I put the tendency, well, that's a lot more troublesome. So it brings out even better the upward tendency than if we were starting at around 1995 or 96 or 97. I think that's where that is. So it's important as well to add the context. And also, it helps us to be more honest and more representative of the reality in our graphic representations. And well, here's a pie chart, only if you have two categorical pieces of data. So a point that is a little controversial sometimes because we like the pie charts. We see them often. However, it's not the best way to be able to show data because the eye still has trouble comparing the different points here. So the points in the pie chart. So here, if we put this in a bar graph, it would be a lot easier to compare and see the different points because you can see that the lengths are really comparable, one next to the other, instead of having to compare the different angles here. Here, it's not too bad with the categories that we've presented, but it could become more difficult to interpret, especially the more categories that we start adding. So generally speaking, a good rule of thumb would be to limit the pie chart and its use to only when we have two categories to show. So here, it's very easy to compare the 2 points because we only have two. But as soon as we have more, it becomes more difficult to compare them. So if I didn't have the 30% here and the 20% here, it would be very difficult to know up to what point this part is darker. So we wouldn't have a very good idea at this point. And last tip, in terms of the use of data, we want to tell a story. So often we don't want just to use the data for one reason. Like we saw, we want to convince others, we want to analyze, we want to promote a message. And so there are certain tools that we can use on top of the visual representation to be able to go and support our message. So in everything that is around the use. So for example, we can add a title, subtitles, annotations, and also use a certain saturation as such to be able to highlight certain issues or certain points. Let's see a few examples of this. And here we have a very important quote on this. And so we have two examples here. In one example, we are telling a story. In the other one, we are not telling a story, but we are letting the person who is visualizing this to decide for themselves. Is there one that is better than the other? Well, not necessarily. It depends on what we want to do. It depends what we really want to emphasize. If it's a certain message, or do we want to leave the visualization more neutral in that sense, and leave the integration of the person who is there. So here we're using saturation to be able to bring out chocolate, and in the title that we give, in the conclusion that we can bring out from here, so chocolate is the most popular amongst the students who were in the analysis. And then once again, we're using saturation here to be able to bring out one of the two lines amongst the three that we would consider being X, and one as being the most important. And once again, you add a title here if you want to go and give a certain message to this use, then you do it through the consultation, then you go right ahead with a certain opinion on this. And is it bad? It depends with our objective. And another similar example, however, here we are choosing which points are going to be interesting to show. So we really want to put the emphasis on the point at the beginning and on the end point and on 2013, where we had a new policy. And once again, we support it with the text. And then once again, it's something that we could do judiciously. So it's to accompany, obviously, with the commandment in terms of the bias. So the sixth one, so the bias will not be perception of information. So it can be very powerful, this type of visual support, to be able to do it in a responsible manner and intentional as well. But it facilitates the reading. So there's a relief, and then there's also some onboarding, and away you go. And finally, I'm not going to talk about this with too many details. It's not really the topic of the presentation, but Here is a small list of tools that are used in the industry and data use. That's something that people often consult, and it's done according to the activity and according to their level of implementation. So here's a few resources for you. And that's basically my presentation. That's it. I think I finished in advance, so we can go with questions. And so there's an exercise that we can do. And there's some questions. And this is one that follows us, and we can do that as a comment. Can we put and someone from the staff, and if not, there's people in the room as well. I have a small question for those who are thinking about it, and I come back to 3D, but and the tools, I imagine that most tools on the list that's here are tools that are generally used, and they're not 3D because you still need and it's something that's going to allow 3D, and we have tools that are easy to be able to do some representation 3D that is quite dynamic. And it does create distortion. And when we have the possibility to do visualization in 3D dynamically, then I could move with my mouse all 3 dimensions to be able to see the contrast with Z, a point that is on Z in terms of X and Y, and vice versa. And do you know tools that are easy to use for 3D? To be able to visualize it, and I worked more in 2D, so I don't know as much what exists. And if we offer in their library for the web, and also to see the possibility of doing graphics in 3D in terms of scientific data, and it could be quite good. And so that would be definitely something that we should look at. If not, I don't know any other libraries who allow you to do the visualization in 3D. There is some that allows you to do 3D, and that allows you to bring it yourself to be able to do the use of WebGL or different other wrappers that go on top. And that's a really good starting point for the visualization. So I never realized that a pie chart, it's useless because we do some quite often. And is that the only time that we can use it? So the fact of this type of diagram, and could this be eliminated from this? Because frankly, I don't see the interest of doing a pie chart with them. So personally, it's obvious that this is something that isn't rigid, so we can find different contexts when we prefer having pie charts. Where people could create pie charts under certain contexts, but if you want some communication, the pie chart, usually we don't need it. We have better representations. And generally speaking, I won't see where the pie diagram is the best representation. So is there something better than the lines? And when we put ourselves in a short space, like you mentioned, with your monster there, the graph monster. So at the time when it's a curve, we're no longer able to interpret the data visually because it's not perfectly straight. Yes. So exactly. So it's not exactly the same thing because and we can have this. Um and it looks a little bit like it should be intuitive. And this is according to what would be the most easy or difficult. And after that, the it's very easy for in the comparison to compare lengths, but the angle is a little bit more difficult. And even if we see the diagram that is more representative, and it is where it's a line and more of a number, even there, the length is a lot more efficient to be able to collect all of the different information. So, yeah, it really does look like what's here, and it's a lot easier perceptually to see these lengths rather than the pie chart sizes. Okay, thank you, thank you. I don't see any other questions. I maybe have a small one just to add a little bit of time to the schedule, but you already have done a list of the classic errors that we can do in visualization, but you have also experience as a teacher. And other than the one that you told us because of your presentation, are there other errors that you often see with students? It's a good question. What's the one that I would see the most often? Well, it's more. It's not a commandment specifically, but I'm gonna see. Throughout the presentation, I think I showed something about this. It's really here in this slide. So we say that we always want to iterate around our data, but also our questions. So often we're going to keep some data in mind to work strictly. We want to work on that, but sometimes the questions can be forgotten. So at the end, we're going to talk about a design that is going to be quite interesting, and that's going to inform us on the data. But also, finally, it's not going to meet our questions or answer our questions. We're going to answer it, but maybe in a way that could have been more direct. So I'm going to answer it, but it's going to be kind of like secondary to the actualization, but other ones will take more precedent. So it's really important by working to remember our questions and also to think and assess for ourselves these different questions and to be able to know whether we're meeting or answering our questions and our intentions in our designs. Okay, thank you. So I think that we've answered a few questions and we can go back. I don't think there's anything else. So I think that we can probably describe the exercise essentially on the chat. I have sent a link to be able to have access to a document that's on Google Drive. And here it is, it's open. It's a document that Madame Gélinas shared kindly with us. And now Madame Gélinas is going to explain the exercise to you, and you are going to be in groups of maximum 4 people online and in the room. And we're going to do this exercise now 10 minutes max. And then we're going to come back and as a plenary to be able to wrap up with like for 5 minutes with a presentation from someone who is very brave. So Madame Gélinas, I would like you to continue with the presentation of the exercise. Yes, perfect. So for myself, I'd like to tell you that I'm going to have to leave you very soon in the next 5 to 10 minutes. So I would like to introduce the exercise to you, but unfortunately I won't be with you for the conclusion. So I'm going to leave you in the hands of Davide and Catherine. So in order to present the exercise, we have, here's a situation. Imagine that you have something on the internet and you have a blog, and we have to share what interests us, so which is related by the science of the data and obviously the visualization of data. So what you've done here is a huge effort. For 1 year, you have look at all of your expenses for food expenses in a spreadsheet, in Excel or Google Sheets or whatever. And every time that you purchase something at the store, you've written it in a Google Sheet. And accordingly, every day throughout the year, so finally you have a long list of all your purchases at the grocery store. So you want to learn certain things on what you've purchased from this huge collection of data that you've taken. So we're going to describe the data. So for each purchase that you would have done, you would have written down a line on your sheet, and that line or that column, and so there's going to be the date of the purchase, so over here, and the store, so it could be a market, IGA, or whatever it is. It just has to be a store. You're going to have the name of the product. So if it's a spaghetti, apple, whatever. So, and then the category, and then imagine that you have defined them according to your food habits. So fruits and vegetables, meats, milk, dairy, according to how things work out. So you can say there's about 10 different categories here. And you're going to have noticed the amount, if the product is organic or not, its price, its producer, as well as its wrapping, to the best of your knowledge. And you have about 2,500 lines, and that's pretty important for the follow-up. And the target audience are the readers of your blog. So your family who are interested in the science of data, or people on the web in general. So the task that you want to do is to design what you're going to place on your blog. What are you going to post in terms of your data collection? So firstly, to be able to do a certain process, you're going to have a minimum of 3 questions that could be interesting to explore with your data. After that, you're going to choose the whole question amongst the ones that you visited, which one is the most interesting, and you're going to do a minimum of 1 to 3 designs of visualization that are going to allow you to explore this whole issue. And then that's going to be on the web, and it could have some animation, it could have some interactions, clicks, or covers, or anything that you want, a whole bunch of things. So if you want, it's not, you don't have to, but you can include a plan of all the different interactions or all the different animations that you would like to include. So if that would be the reflection that we have to make to ourselves for the exercise, would recommend to you to do it on with a paper and pencil, or other tools like Canva or Figma, if they still exist, whatever you feel more comfortable with. So I think the simplest is pen and pencil and paper. And when you finish, you can go and copy paste here. And this will be to be shared in an edit mode. So you can take photos of your paper, screenshots. It doesn't have to be super fancy. And like you saw in the presentation, it could be just like this. It's not necessarily refined, it's more conceptual. And that's it. You can go here once it's done, and then try to be as realistic as possible in the visualization. And yes, it's conceptual, but we still have to be realistic as well. So we have to do it on the condition of that the choice that we're going to do could really support these categories, and that it is possible to show 2,500 lines and whatnot. So that's basically it. So I'm going to give you the time to do that, and I think that's it for me. Okay, well, thank you so much for the presentation. I'm going to try to create these groups on Zoom and here in the classroom. So for the time being, thank you so much for your presentation. It was really appreciated. And if not, until next time. and Olivia. And thank you so much once more. Yeah, thank you for the invitation. It was really appreciated. And yeah, don't hesitate if you have any questions following the presentation. You can always meet me on LinkedIn, Twitter, whatnot. So thank you.
Alors, bonjour encore. Est-ce que il y a du monde ici?
So hello, we're back. So it's going to be pretty quick. We did a little bit of okay, people are coming in little by little. So thank you. Well, for the last 4 or 5 minutes, there's a couple groups that worked, and there was a few ideas that went around, and someone is doing some screenshots and putting them online. So in the link that I sent you on the chat, you're going to see at a certain point in time a drawing. And maybe I'll let Madame Baudry. Madame Baudry, could you say kind of what we thought? We didn't do a drawing or anything, but we are going to have other participants who are going to give you one and show you one. Well, rather than that, we're going to do kind of a mental visualization of the drawing that we would have done, because we talked a lot and we didn't have time to take pictures. So we said to ourselves that we wanted to illustrate the inflation in the last 12 months. So we're going from the 4 categories. So the fruits and vegetables, meats and substitutes, cereals, and imagine that there's going to be four curves over 52 weeks of the year. And we're going to illustrate, when it comes down to it, the price by amount purchased, whether it's the same value, well, the value of price per quantity that is fixed from one week to the next, so that we can see only the increase of price for the same quantity of goods. So you're going to have 4 curves, and it does illustrate the inflation with time, which allows us to notice that maybe the meats and substitutes are the ones that increase the quickest in comparison to cereals, for example. So the title above would be meat costs 10 times more than at the beginning of the year, something like that. Okay. Thank you. We also thought in terms of dates, yeah, you can't take out the organic sectors either. So now I'm trying to share the screen again, just a sec. Okay, here is the example of those who are in the room, and so go ahead. 3 minutes, you can press your button. Yeah, go ahead. So ourselves, we have inventoried 3. We didn't talk about inflation. We didn't touch inflation. But we did talk, the first question is, what category of food use the most plastics per unit and amount? So what we thought was to bring this back with a histogram, and we had 2 boxes for each one of the types of food. One of them is a plastic product, and the other one is not plastic. And here we bring back the amount, so the volume, the quantity, milliliters. Then we take the number of milliliters divided by the maximum, and then the category. And if it's kilograms, we take the value in kilograms, the maximum category, which gives us a scale that is comparable when we remove the measuring things. And we show our categories in a way that we present in the second graphic. We show the categories according to the order of where there's more volume for plastic as a pollutant. And it automatically gives us in an ascending order the increase where there is the category that has the most plastic. And the next question that we'd like to ask is to know, amongst the 10 categories of food that are the most polluting, which ones? What's the proportion? The proportion of organic and non-organic. And there we bring back another graphic that is here. Unfortunately, you don't see it. It's a bar graph where we show our 10 categories and we're looking for the percentage. So when I do the average, and it gives me the proportion, but in X, Y, and I have my 10 products that pollute the most, and then I can see which ones amongst these ones that are organic. And then we also hope that these products be majority non-organic. So the last question that we asked is, what are the prices that are devoted to each region? So we want to know, amongst the 8 categories that I had purchased, are they products that are purchased locally, or are they purchased in a foreign country? So there's a map here where it shows Canada that comes back in larger letters, and the rest is smaller. And then we have the proportions here of the products that are Canadian, that and the proportion of the United States and the country. And then so if I have 50%, then 40%, 40% in Canada, and then I can easily see that's there's a large amount that's on the outside. Okay, that's pretty cool. Thank you so much, and thank you for having participated. So this is. Thank you for all your participation. So having said this, we're going to conclude today's session, and I would like to thank you all. So we'll see you on December 8th for our 8th and final session. So have a great day. Thank you.